A shadowy figure slips through the mist-shrouded gardens of the velvet vicarage, a glint of steel in hand, as whispers of betrayal echo in the night. Welcome to Miss Marple's most perplexing case yet. Grab a cup of tea, settle into your seat, and let the intrigue unfold. If you're hooked on this tale of mystery and cunning, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The Arrival at St. Mary, Mead. The train rattled into the quaint station of St. Mary Mead on a crisp autumn afternoon, its whistle piercing the serene countryside air like a distant cry for help. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed spectacles and her knitting bag tucked under her arm, stepped off the carriage with the grace of someone who had seen more than her share of life's little dramas. She wasn't here for a holiday, oh no. A telegram from her old friend, the Reverend Clement, had summoned her urgently. Trouble at the vicarage, it read. Velvet whispers hide dark secrets. Need your insight. Miss Marple adjusted her woolen shawl against the chill and scanned the platform, where a young curate named Timothy waited with a nervous fidget. Good day. Miss Marple, Timothy said, tipping his hat with hands that trembled slightly. The Reverend sends his apologies. He's tied up with parish matters, but he's ever so grateful you've come. The vicarage, well, it's not the same since the incident. His voice dropped to a hush, as if the very trees might be listening. Miss Marple nodded knowingly, her mind already piecing together the fragments. St. Mary Mead was her home, a sleepy village where everyone knew everyone's business, or so it seemed. But the velvet vicarage, named for its lush, crimson drapes that lined every window like blood-red secrets, had always stood apart, a grand old house on the hill, home to the Clements for generations. As they drove up the winding lane in Timothy's modest car, Miss Marple observed the changing landscape. Golden leaves fluttered down from ancient oaks, and the vicarage loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls giving it an air of timeless elegance mixed with subtle decay. Tell me about this incident, young man, she prompted gently, her tone inviting confidence without pressure. Timothy glanced sideways, his knuckles white on the wheel. It started 2 weeks ago. The Reverend found a note slipped under the study door, anonymous, of course. It accused his wife Lenora of improprieties with the local squire, Mr. Hargrove. But that's not the half of it. Then, the velvet curtains in the drawing room were slashed to ribbons one night, and a priceless family heirloom, a silver chalice from the 17th century, vanished without a trace. Miss Marple's eyebrows arched ever so slightly. Intriguing. And who else resides at the vicarage? Timothy rattled off the household. The Reverend Clement, kind but absent-minded, his elegant wife Lenora, who hosted lavish tea parties, their daughter Eliza, a spirited girl of 20 with a fondness for modern novels, the loyal housekeeper Mrs. Price, who had served the family for decades, and a new gardener, Mr. Blackwood, hired just months ago, with a scar across his cheek that he claimed came from a wartime injury. And visitors? Miss Marple pressed. Oh, plenty. The squire drops by often for chess with the Reverend. And there's Miss Felicity, Lenora's spinster sister from London, who's been staying for the season. They pulled up to the vicarage gates, where the ironwork twisted like forgotten riddles. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and fresh-baked scones. But an undercurrent of tension hung like fog. The Reverend greeted them in the hallway, his face lined with worry beneath his clerical collar. Jane, thank heavens, he said, clasping her hands. This business has the whole village buzzing. Accusations, vandalism. It's as if some malevolent force has taken root here. Lenora appeared from the kitchen, her poise impeccable, though her eyes darted nervously. We're so relieved you're here, Miss Marple. Please, make yourself at home. Over tea in the drawing room, where the slashed velvet curtains had been hastily mended with uneven stitches, Miss Marple listened as the family recounted the events. The anonymous note had been typed on plain paper, no fingerprints, postmarked from the village itself. The chalice disappeared during a garden fete, when the house was full of guests. "Anyone could have done it," Eliza chimed in, her voice laced with excitement rather than fear. "But why target us? We're just a boring vicarage family." Miss Marple smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "My dear, in my experience, no family is ever truly boring. Secrets have a way of weaving themselves into the fabric of everyday life, much like these velvet drapes." She excused herself to unpack in the guest room, but not before taking a quiet stroll through the gardens. The borders were immaculate, thanks to Mr. Blackwood, who nodded curtly as he pruned roses. His eyes, she noted, lingered a moment too long on the vicarage windows. Back inside, Mrs. Price bustled about, muttering about outsiders stirring trouble. Miss Marple settled into an armchair by the fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as her mind raced. This wasn't just theft or slander. It felt personal, like a thread pulled from a tapestry, threatening to unravel the whole. As evening fell, a soft knock at her door revealed Timothy, looking even more anxious. "Miss Marple, I didn't want to say earlier, but I saw something odd the night of the vandalism. A shadow in the hall, slipping away toward the servants' quarters." She patted his arm reassuringly. "Thank you, dear boy. Every detail helps." Alone again, she pondered the players. The accused wife, the scarred gardener, the visiting sister. What connected them? The velvet, soft, luxurious, yet easily torn, seemed symbolic, hiding something deeper. The chapter closes with Miss Marple gazing out at the darkening sky, a storm brewing on the horizon. Little did she know, the real tempest was just beginning, leading us into the shadows of suspicion in the next part of our tale. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Study. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the velvet vicarage, casting a warm glow across the study where Miss Marple sat with a cup of tea, her knitting needles resting quietly in her lap. The room was a treasure trove of history. Oak-panelled walls lined with leather-bound books, a mahogany desk cluttered with the Reverend's sermon notes, and a faint smell of old paper mingling with wax polish. She'd requested to see the study first, sensing it held clues to the anonymous note that had sparked this mystery. The Reverend, ever obliging, had left her alone to poke about, as he put it, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the desk, where a sleek typewriter sat, its keys gleaming under the light. She ran a finger along its edge, noting it was the same model mentioned in the police report about the typed note accusing Lenora. "Curious," she murmured, her mind turning like the gears of a well-oiled clock. The note had been slipped under this very door, yet the study was kept locked when not in use. Who had access? She tested the door's lock. Sturdy, no signs of tampering. Her attention shifted to a small brass key hanging on a hook by the bookshelves, half hidden behind a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. It fit the lock perfectly. Footsteps approached and Lenora entered, her silk dress rustling softly. "Miss Marple, have you found anything?" she asked, her voice steady, but her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Miss Marple smiled warmly, deflecting. "Just getting a feel for the place, my dear. This is a charming room. Do you often use the typewriter?" Lenora's eyes flickered to the machine. "Oh, hardly. It's mostly for Clement's correspondence. I prefer handwritten notes. More personal, don't you think?" Her smile was tight, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands. As Lenora excused herself, Miss Marple continued her inspection, her sharp eyes catching a faint smudge of ink on the desk's edge. She dabbed it with a handkerchief, blue ink fresh enough to suggest recent use. Tucked beneath a blotter, she found a crumpled sheet of paper, blank except for a single typed word. Guilt. Her pulse quickened, but she slipped the paper back, undisturbed. Someone was careless, or wanted to be found. Later, at luncheon, the household gathered in the dining room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken questions. Eliza chatted brightly about a new detective novel, but her eyes darted to her mother, who picked at her food. The Reverend seemed distracted, murmuring about parish duties, while Mrs. Price served soup with a scowl, muttering about meddling guests. Mr. Blackwood, the gardener, joined them briefly, his rough hands out of place among the fine china. Miss Marple observed his silence, noting how he avoided looking at Lenora. Miss Felicity, the spinster sister, arrived late, her sharp tongue cutting through the tension with remarks about London's superior tea blends. After the meal, Miss Marple slipped into the garden, where Blackwood was raking leaves with methodical precision. "Fine work you do here," she said, her tone disarming. "You must see a lot, working so close to the house." His scar twitched as he met her gaze. "I keep to my tasks, ma'am. Don't much care for indoor gossip." But his eyes lingered on the study window, and Miss Marple filed that away. That evening, she joined the family for a quiet supper, but the mood shifted when a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Timothy, the curate, leapt to his feet, and the group rushed to the source, a shattered vase in the hallway outside the study. Mrs. Price gasped, claiming it was an heirloom, but Miss Marple's eyes were on the floor, where a faint footprint in the dust led toward the servants' stairs. "An accident, surely," the Reverend said, but his voice lacked conviction. Alone in her room later, Miss Marple pondered the day's findings: the typewriter, the inked smudge, the single word guilt, and that fleeting footprint. Someone was playing a dangerous game, leaving breadcrumbs for her to follow, or perhaps to mislead her. She opened her window, letting the cool night air clear her thoughts. A distant rustle in the garden caught her ear, and she glimpsed a figure moving swiftly toward the vicarage's back gate. Too dark to identify, but the movement was deliberate, almost practiced. As she closed the window, Miss Marple's knitting resumed, the steady click of needles a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. The study held secrets, but so did the people around it. Who was weaving this web of deceit, and why? The answers lay just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered in the next twist of this tangled mystery. Chapter 3. The Garden's Whispers. The morning mist clung to the velvet vicarage's gardens, curling around rose bushes and stone paths like a shroud. Miss Marple, wrapped in her shawl, ventured out early, her sensible shoes crunching softly on gravel as she followed the path toward the back gate, where she'd glimpsed the fleeting figure the previous night. The garden was Mr. Blackwood's domain, a masterpiece of order amidst the chaos of the vicarage's troubles. Yet, as she wandered past neatly trimmed hedges, her keen eyes caught irregularities. A snapped twig here, a patch of disturbed earth there, hidden beneath a cluster of late-blooming dahlias. She knelt, her fingers brushing the soil. It was loose, recently turned, and a glint of metal caught her eye. Carefully, she unearthed a small silver locket, its surface tarnished but intact, engraved with the initials L.C. Her lips pursed. Lenora Clement, or perhaps another clue mislaid in haste. Tucking the locket into her pocket, she straightened as Mr. Blackwood appeared, his pruning shears glinting in the pale light. "Morning, ma'am," he said gruffly, his scar stark against his weathered face. "You're up early, looking for something." His tone was polite, but his eyes narrowed. "Just admiring your work," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. "Though I wonder, do you ever find things left behind in the gardens? Trinkets, perhaps?" Blackwood's grip tightened on the shears, but he shrugged. "People are careless. I sweep up what I find and toss it." She nodded, unconvinced, and made a mental note of his guarded demeanour. Back inside, breakfast was a strained affair. Eliza was absent, claiming a headache, while Miss Felicity dominated the conversation with complaints about the village's lack of culture. The Reverend, pale and distracted, mentioned a parish meeting, but his eyes kept drifting to Lenora, who sat silently, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mrs. Price bustled in with fresh toast, her expression sour as she muttered about things going missing. Miss Marple seized the moment. Speaking of missing things, has anyone lost a locket? I found one in the garden. The room stilled. Lenora's cup clattered against its saucer, and Felicity's fork paused mid-air. A locket? Lenora said, her voice too sharp. What did it look like? Miss Marple described it vaguely, watching reactions. The Reverend frowned, puzzled, while Felicity sniffed, dismissing it as probably some servant's trinket. But Lenora's face had paled, and she excused herself abruptly. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloguing the exchange. Later, she sought out Eliza, finding her in the library, curled up with a book but not reading. Not feeling well, dear? Miss Marple asked gently, settling beside her. Eliza sighed, her fingers tracing the book's spine. It's all so oppressive, Miss Marple. This house, the whispers, the way everyone watches each other. I saw Mother crying last night, but she wouldn't tell me why. Miss Marple patted her hand, noting the girl's sincerity but also her quick glance toward the door, as if expecting someone to listen. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village post office, a tiny shop run by Mrs. Gibbs, whose knack for gossip rivaled her own observation skills. That note you mentioned, Reverend's trouble, Mrs. Gibbs whispered, leaning over the counter. Posted right here it was. No one saw who dropped it, but I noticed Mr. Hargrove, the squire, in that day, looking shifty. And that Miss Felicity, always mailing letters to London. Odd for someone just visiting. Miss Marple thanked her, filing away the names. Returning to the vicarage, she overheard raised voices from the drawing room. Peering through the cracked door, she saw Lenora and Mr. Hargrove, the squire, in heated discussion. You must stop this, Charles, Lenora hissed. It's gone too far. Hargrove's reply was low, urgent. You know why I can't. Not yet. They parted as Mrs. Price approached, and Miss Marple slipped away, her heart quickening. An affair or something else? As dusk fell, she returned to the garden, retracing her steps to the back gate. The lock was old but intact, suggesting the nighttime figure had a key or was adept at climbing. A faint rustle drew her attention to the shrubbery, where she spotted a torn scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. Fine silk, the kind Lenora favoured. Tucking it away with the locket, Miss Marple felt the web tightening. Someone was moving pieces in this game, but were they hunter or prey? Back in her room, she spread her findings on the table. The locket, the silk, and her notes. The garden was more than a backdrop. It was a stage for secrets, its whispers louder than the vicarage's walls. As she gazed out at the darkening paths, a flicker of light moved near the gate again, then vanished. The mystery was deepening, pulling her toward the next thread in this intricate tapestry. Chapter 4. The Squire's Gambit. The velvet vicarage hummed with quiet tension as Miss Marple descended the staircase, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. The morning was bright, but clouds loomed on the horizon, mirroring the unease that seemed to seep from the walls. She had decided to pay a visit to Mr. Hargrove, the squire, whose heated exchange with Lenora the previous day lingered in her mind like a half-stitched pattern. His estate, a sprawling manor just beyond the village, was her destination, and she set out on foot, relishing the crisp air and the chance to think. The squire's home was grand, with manicured lawns and a fountain that gurgled like a gossiping neighbour. Mr. Hargrove greeted her at the door, his charm polished, but his eyes wary. Miss Marple, what a delight, he said, ushering her into a parlour adorned with hunting trophies and heavy oak furniture. To what do I owe the pleasure? His smile was all teeth, and she noted the faint tremor in his hand as he poured tea. I've been enjoying St. Mary Mead's charm, she began, her tone light as she accepted a cup. But I hear whispers of trouble at the vicarage. You're a frequent visitor there, aren't you? Hargrove's smile faltered just for a moment. Oh, I play chess with the Reverend now and then. Good man. Bit distracted lately. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Village gossip can be vicious, you know. People see shadows where there's only light. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the room. A chessboard sat on a side table, its pieces mid-game, One knight toppled as if in surrender. "A fine set," she remarked, steering the conversation. "Do you ever play with Mrs. Clement? She seems a strategic sort." Hargrove laughed, a touch too loudly. "Lenora? No, she's more for tea parties than tactics, though she's clever enough when she wants to be." His words carried an edge, and Miss Marple tucked that away. As they chatted, she noticed a small photograph on the mantel. A younger Hargrove, with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Lenora, though the image was faded. "A relative?" she asked innocently. Hargrove's face tightened. "My late sister Clara. She and Lenora were close once." He changed the subject abruptly, offering a tour of his rose garden, but Miss Marple declined, citing the walk back. In the village, she stopped by the church where Timothy was polishing pews. "Mr. Hargrove's sister Clara," she said casually. "Did you know her?" Timothy paused, his cloth still. "Before my time, but I heard she died young. Some scandal hushed up. The squire doesn't talk about her." His voice lowered. "Some say she and Lenora fell out over a man." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly, but she pressed no further. Back at the vicarage, she found Eliza in the conservatory, sketching flowers with a distracted air. "You seem troubled, dear," Miss Marple said, settling beside her. Eliza sighed, her pencil pausing. "It's father. He's been locking himself in his study more, reading old letters. I think they're from Aunt Clara's time. He won't let me see them." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. Letters, a lost sister, a locket with LC. The threads were tangling. That evening, the vicarage hosted a small gathering, with Hargrove among the guests. Miss Marple watched him closely as he laughed with the Reverend, his ease a stark contrast to Lenora's stiff posture across the room. Miss Felicity, ever sharp-tongued, cornered Miss Marple. "You're stirring things up, aren't you?" she said, her eyes glinting. "Be careful. Old wounds bleed easily." Before Miss Marple could reply, a sharp cry cut through the chatter. Mrs. Price, in the kitchen, holding a knife with a broken blade, claiming she'd found it under a floorboard. The room buzzed with murmurs as Miss Marple examined the knife, its handle worn but its edge still sharp despite the damage. "Curious place to lose a knife," she said lightly, but her eyes met Hargrove's, who looked away too quickly. Lenora excused herself, citing a headache, while the Reverend fumbled for words, his face pale. The gathering dissolved soon after, leaving a heavier air than before. In her room, Miss Marple spread her clues on the table. The locket, the silk scrap, and now a mental note of the knife. Hargrove's charm hid something, grief, guilt, or perhaps vengeance. The past was clawing its way into the present, and the squire was at its heart. As she gazed out at the moonlit manor in the distance, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Someone slipping through Hargrove's gate. The game was shifting, and the next move would reveal more of this shadowed puzzle. Chapter 5. The Letters of the Past. The velvet vicarage was cloaked in the stillness of early evening, the kind of quiet that felt heavy with secrets. Miss Marple sat by the fireplace in the guest room, her knitting needles idle as she turned over the day's discoveries in her mind. The broken knife, the squire's guarded demeanour, and Eliza's mention of old letters had woven a new thread into the mystery. She decided it was time to explore the Reverend's private sanctuary, the attic, where he reportedly stored papers from decades past. With the household distracted by preparations for a parish supper, she slipped upstairs, her steps soft on the creaking floorboards. The attic door was unlocked, a careless oversight in a house so fraught with tension. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the scent of aged paper and dust. Boxes lined the walls, labelled with faded ink. Sermons, parish records, correspondence. Miss Marple's eyes settled on a small, unlocked trunk tucked in a corner, its leather cracked but intact. Kneeling, she opened it to find a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost envelope bore Clara's name, addressed to the Reverend in a flowing script. Her heart quickened as she untied the bundle, careful not to disturb the brittle pages. The letters were from Clara, Hargrove's late sister, written years ago when Lenora was newly married to the Reverend. They spoke of village life, but one caught Miss Marple's eye, a letter dated shortly before Clara's death. "I cannot forgive her," it read, "for what she took from me. She wears her smile like a mask, but I see the truth." The words were sharp, bitter, hinting at a betrayal. Miss Marple tucked the letter into her pocket, her mind racing. Clara and Lenora's falling out. Was it tied to the locket marked LC? Descending the stairs, she nearly collided with Mrs. Price, whose eyes narrowed. "Lost your way, Miss Marple?" the housekeeper asked, her tone clipped. "Just exploring the house's charm," Miss Marple replied smoothly, but Mrs. Price's gaze lingered suspicious. At the supper, the vicarage buzzed with villagers, their chatter a thin veneer over the underlying strain. Miss Marple watched Lenora, who moved among the guests with practiced grace, though her smile faltered when Hargrove arrived, late and dishevelled. Seizing a moment, Miss Marple approached the Reverend, who was refilling a tray of sandwiches. "Clement, dear, do you still keep Clara's letters?" she asked softly. His face clouded, and he set the tray down. "I haven't looked at them in years. Painful memories, you know." "Why do you ask?" She deflected with a smile. "Just curious about old friends." But his reaction confirmed the letter's significance. Later, she cornered Timothy in the hallway, his face flushed from helping with the event. "You mentioned Clara's scandal," she said. "Anything more you've heard?" Timothy hesitated, glancing around. "Only rumours. Some say she loved a man who chose Lenora instead. Broke her heart, they say, and she never recovered." Miss Marple nodded, the pieces shifting in her mind like a kaleidoscope. As the evening wound down, she slipped into the conservatory, where Eliza sat alone, staring at the moonlit garden. "You've been reading your father's letters, haven't you?" Miss Marple said gently. Eliza started, her eyes wide. I found one in his desk. It was Clara's, accusing Mother of stealing her happiness. I didn't tell anyone. It felt wrong." Miss Marple patted her shoulder, sensing the girl's turmoil. "You did well to share, dear." Before retiring, Miss Marple revisited the garden gate under cover of darkness, her flashlight catching a fresh scuff mark on the latch. Someone was still moving in the shadows, and the letters suggested a motive rooted in old wounds. As she returned to her room, a faint creak echoed from the attic stairs, as if someone else had been there. The past was speaking, loud and clear, but its message was still coded. The next step in this unravelling mystery would bring her closer to the heart of the vicarage's pain. Chapter 6. The Midnight Visitor. The velvet vicarage was silent under a blanket of stars, the kind of quiet that amplified every creak and rustle. Miss Marple lay awake, her knitting untouched as she replayed the attic's secrets in her mind. The letters, with their bitter undertones, pointed to a fracture between Clara and Lenora. But the creak on the attic stairs lingered like a warning. Someone else was seeking answers or covering tracks. She rose, slipping on her dressing gown, and crept to the window, where the garden lay bathed in moonlight. A flicker of movement near the back gate caught her eye, the same spot she'd marked before. With a shawl draped over her shoulders, Miss Marple moved silently downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step. The back door was slightly ajar, a draught curling through the gap. She eased it open and stepped into the garden, her breath catching in the chill air. The gate was unlatched, swaying faintly, and beyond it, a narrow path led to the woods bordering Hargrove's estate. She followed, her flashlight dimmed to avoid detection, her senses sharp. A low murmur reached her ears, voices, hushed but urgent, coming from a small clearing. She crouched behind a gnarled oak, peering through the branches. Two figures stood close, their silhouettes indistinct but their tension palpable. One was tall, broad-shouldered, Hargrove, she guessed, while the other was slighter, cloaked in a dark coat. "You promised it would end," the smaller figure whispered, voice sharp with anger. "I've waited long enough." Hargrove's reply was low, almost pleading. Give me time. It's not as simple as you think. They parted abruptly, the smaller figure slipping toward the vicarage, while Hargrove vanished into the woods. Miss Marple waited, heart pounding, before retracing her steps. Inside, she paused in the kitchen, where a faint scent of lavender lingered. Miss Felicity's perfume, unmistakable from the supper. Could she have been the cloaked figure? Filing the thought away, Miss Marple returned to her room, but sleep eluded her. She lit a candle and examined the locket again, prying it open to reveal a tiny photograph of a young man, his face unfamiliar, but his eyes strikingly like Eliza's. At breakfast, the household was subdued. Lenora was absent, claiming fatigue, while the Reverend buried himself in a newspaper. Eliza fidgeted, her sketchbook abandoned, and Mrs. Price slammed plates with more force than necessary. Miss Felicity, however, was bright, almost too cheerful, regaling the table with tales of London's theatres. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the faint mud on her boots, barely visible under the table. Later, she sought out Timothy in the churchyard, where he was tending graves. "Do you ever see folks about at night near the vicarage?" she asked casually. Timothy blushed, hesitating. "Once or twice. I thought it was just poachers, but last night I saw someone by the gate. Couldn't tell who, but they moved fast." His honesty was refreshing, and Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning to the midnight meeting. In the afternoon, she visited the village tailor, Mr. Wren, who doubled as a local historian. "I'm curious about the vicarage's past," she said, sipping tea in his cluttered shop. "Any tales of visitors or unusual events?" Wren's eyes lit up. "Oh, years ago, there was talk of a stranger staying at the vicarage, a young man who courted Clara but left suddenly. Some say he was a soldier, others a drifter. Broke her heart, they did say." Miss Marple nodded, the locket's photograph flashing in her mind. Back at the vicarage, she lingered in the hallway, where a portrait of a younger Reverend and Lenora hung, their smiles radiant. A faint mark on the frame caught her eye, a smudge of lavender wax, as if a candle had dripped. Miss Felicity's scent again. Was she searching or hiding something? As evening fell, Miss Marple overheard a tense exchange between Eliza and Mrs. Price in the pantry. "You shouldn't snoop in Father's things," Mrs. Price snapped. Eliza retorted, "I just want to know why everyone's lying." Retiring to her room, Miss Marple added the night's clues to her collection. The overheard meeting, the lavender scent, the locket's photograph. The midnight visitor had stirred the pot, revealing alliances and resentments. Someone was desperate to keep the past buried, but the truth was clawing its way out, leading her toward the next revelation in this shadowed dance. Chapter 7. The Unseen Guest. The velvet vicarage stood hushed under a heavy sky, the air thick with the promise of rain, as Miss Marple sat at her window, her knitting needles moving rhythmically, though her mind was far from the scarf taking shape. The midnight meeting in the woods, the lavender-scented clues, and the locket's mysterious photograph had tightened the knot of this mystery. Someone in the household was moving in the shadows, and the faint drip of wax on the portrait frame pointed to Miss Felicity, whose cheerful facade masked something deeper. But Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. Every thread needed testing before it could be woven into the truth. She decided to focus on the vicarage's unseen spaces, the corners where secrets might linger unnoticed. After breakfast, where the household's strained silences were punctuated only by the clink of cutlery, she excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. Instead, she slipped into the narrow corridor leading to the servants' quarters, a part of the house she'd yet to explore. The hallway was dim, its walls lined with faded wallpaper, and the air carried a faint mustiness, as if rarely disturbed. A small door, half hidden behind a coat rack, caught her eye. It led to a cramped staircase, spiraling up to a part of the attic she hadn't seen before. The upper attic was a warren of forgotten things, broken furniture, dusty trunks, and cobwebs that danced in the draught from a cracked window. Miss Marple moved carefully, her flashlight casting long shadows. In a corner, beneath a tattered quilt, she found a small wooden box, its lock rusted but intact. With a hairpin from her bag, she coaxed it open, revealing a bundle of photographs and a single yellowed letter. The photographs showed a young Lenora, Clara, and a man, the same face from the locket, with piercing eyes and a soldier's uniform. The letter, unsigned, was brief. "Meet me at the gate midnight. We can't stay silent forever." The handwriting was shaky, almost desperate, and dated a week before Clara's death. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. The locket, the letters, the midnight meetings past and present were linked. She tucked the letter and one photograph into her pocket, relocking the box and covering it as she'd found it. As she descended, a floorboard creaked behind her. She turned, but the attic was empty, though the air felt heavier, as if someone had been watching. Shaking off the chill, she returned to the main house, where preparations for the evening's parish meeting were underway. At the meeting, held in the vicarage's drawing room, villagers filled the space with murmurs and curious glances. Miss Marple sat near the back, her eyes on the household. Lenora, elegant as ever, poured tea with steady hands, but her gaze darted to the door whenever it opened. The Reverend spoke earnestly about community unity, but his words faltered when Hargrove entered, his coat dusted with rain. Miss Felicity, seated beside Eliza, whispered something that made the girl stiffen, her sketchbook clutched tightly. Mrs. Price moved among the guests, her expression dour, while Blackwood lingered at the edges, his scarred face unreadable. Miss Marple seized a moment to approach Hargrove, who was sipping tea by the fireplace. "You must miss your sister, Mr. Hargrove," she said gently. "I hear she was close to the Clements." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Clara was. Spirited. Her loss was a blow to us all. His eyes flicked to Lenora, and Miss Marple noted the brief flare of something, anger, or perhaps regret. Before she could press further, a commotion erupted near the door. Timothy, flustered, announced that the church's donation box had been tampered with, coins scattered across the vestry floor. The room buzzed with shock, and Miss Marple followed, the crowd to the church, where the vestry's lock showed scratches as if pried open. "Amateurs," she murmured, noting the clumsy marks. Timothy whispered to her, "I checked it last night. It was fine. Someone did this today." His eyes darted to Blackwood, who stood nearby, arms crossed. Miss Marple filed that away, her mind returning to the attic's letter. Was this theft a distraction or another piece of the puzzle? Back at the vicarage, she lingered in the drawing room after the guests left, examining the fireplace. A faint ash mark on the hearth caught her eye. Too deliberate to be accidental, kneeling, she brushed it aside, revealing a tiny brass key, half buried in soot. It was identical to the one in the study, but its presence here was odd. As she pocketed it, footsteps approached, and Miss Felicity appeared, her smile sharp. "Still sleuthing, Miss Marple. You'll find nothing but dust in this old house." Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered on the hearth. That night, Miss Marple sat by her window, the key, letter, and photograph before her. The unseen guest, past or present, was circling closer, leaving clues like breadcrumbs. The donation box, the attic's secrets, and Felicity's watchful gaze suggested a deeper game, one rooted in old promises and betrayals. As rain began to patter against the glass, a faint knock echoed from the back door, too soft for the household to hear. Someone was out there, and the next move in this intricate dance was about to unfold. Chapter 8. The echoes of betrayal. The velvet vicarage seemed to hold its breath as dawn broke, grey light filtering through the heavy curtains and casting long shadows across the polished floors. Miss Marple rose early, her mind a whirl of threads. The attic's letter, the brass key from the fireplace, the photograph of the soldier, and that faint knock at the back door in the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy, as if the house itself were reluctant to reveal more. She slipped the key into her pocket alongside the locket and the silk scrap, determined to follow the trail of the unseen guest. Today, she would probe deeper, testing the loyalties and fears of the household. After a quiet breakfast, where the Reverend's tired eyes avoided hers, and Lenora's smile was a brittle mask, Miss Marple announced her intention to visit the church. "A bit of history does the soul good," she said lightly, though her true aim was to inspect the tampered donation box more closely. Timothy met her at the church, his young face etched with worry. "The villagers are talking," he confided as they entered the vestry. "They think the vicarage is cursed. First the chalice, now this." The donation box sat on a table, its lock scratched and bent, coins still scattered like fallen leaves. Miss Marple knelt, her magnifying glass revealing faint scratches that matched the broken knife from the kitchen. "Not a professional thief," she murmured, "but someone desperate to be noticed." She asked Timothy to show her the church's old records, hoping to uncover more about Clara's time. In a dusty ledger, she found an entry from 20 years ago, a donation from Clara Hargrove for a new altar cloth, signed with a flourish. Beside it, in smaller script, was a note. "For forgiveness." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Forgiveness for what? Timothy, hovering nearby, added, "I heard Clara was devout, but she stopped coming to church after a row with Lenora. No one knows why." The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained blurred. Returning to the vicarage, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Price, who was polishing silver in the pantry with a vigour that suggested anger. "You've been with the family a long time, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple began, her tone warm. "You must have known Clara well." The housekeeper's cloth paused, her knuckles whitening. "She was a bright girl, too good for this village. Her death broke the squire's heart, and the Reverend's, though he hides it." Her voice was clipped, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of grief. Miss Marple pressed gently. "And Lenora? Was she close to Clara?" Mrs. Price snorted. "Close as sisters, until they weren't. Some man came between them, or so the gossip went. I don't hold with tittle-tattle." But her words carried weight, and Miss Marple noted the housekeeper's loyalty and her omissions. In the afternoon, she wandered to the drawing room, where Eliza was arranging flowers, her movements restless. "You're always watching, Miss Marple," the girl said, half laughing, half nervous. "Do you think we're all hiding something?" Miss Marple smiled, setting her knitting down. "Everyone hides a little, dear. It's human nature. But truth has a way of blooming, like these roses." Eliza blushed, then whispered, "I found something in Mother's room, a ribbon, like the one on Clara's letters. She locked it away when she saw me." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her tone light. "Curious, perhaps it's just a keepsake." As evening approached, Miss Marple slipped into Lenora's private sitting room, left unattended while the family prepared for a village choir rehearsal. The room was elegant, with delicate furniture and a locked desk drawer that yielded to the brass key from the fireplace. Inside, she found a ribbon matching the attic letters, tied around a small diary. The entries were sparse, but one stood out, dated a month before Clara's death. "C begs me to confess, but I can't. He's gone, and it's too late." Miss Marple closed the diary, her mind racing. The soldier in the photograph, had he been the wedge between Clara and Lenora? At the rehearsal, the Vicarage's drawing room filled with villagers' voices, their harmonies a fragile counterpoint to the tension. Miss Felicity, dressed in sharp London fashion, sat near Hargrove, her laughter too bright. Miss Marple watched them, noting how Felicity's hand brushed his arm, a gesture too familiar for mere acquaintance. Blackwood, lingering by the door, caught her eye, his scar twitching as he watched the pair. Was he jealous or merely observant? After the rehearsal, Miss Marple lingered, pretending to admire the piano. Hargrove approached, his charm strained. "You're quite the detective, Miss Marple," he said, his tone teasing, but his eyes cold. "Find anything interesting?" She smiled serenely. "Only the beauty of human nature, Mr. Hargrove. It's full of surprises." He laughed. But it was hollow, and he left quickly, Felicity trailing him. That night, as the house settled, Miss Marple sat by her window, the diary's words echoing in her mind. A soft thud from the garden drew her attention. A figure, cloaked and swift, slipped through the gate again. She grabbed her flashlight and hurried downstairs, but by the time she reached the garden, the figure was gone. Near the gate, she found a dropped glove, fine leather monogrammed with C.H. Hargroves, or a deliberate plant. Returning to her room, she laid out her clues. The locket, the silk, the letter, the diary, the key, and now the glove. The echoes of betrayal were growing louder, pointing to a love triangle that had shattered lives. Someone was orchestrating this chaos, stirring old wounds to mask a new crime. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Miss Marple knew the next move would bring her closer to the heart of this tangled web. Chapter 9. The Unveiling Shadows. The velvet vicarage awoke to a rare patch of sunlight piercing the clouds, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the house like a perpetual fog. Miss Marple stood in her room, the morning light illuminating the array of clues spread across her bedside table. The tarnished locket with its haunting photograph, the silk scraps stained with garden soil, the crumpled letter from Clara, Lenora's diary with its cryptic confessions, the brass key that had unlocked so many doors, and the monogrammed glove dropped in haste by the midnight intruder. Each item whispered of betrayal, but together they formed a mosaic that demanded resolution. She folded them carefully into her knitting bag, her resolve stealing like the needles within. Today, the shadows would be unveiled. No more games, no more whispers. Descending to the breakfast parlour, she found the household gathered in uneasy silence. The Reverend poked at his eggs, his clerical collar askew. Lenora poured tea with mechanical precision, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Eliza sketched absent-mindedly, her lines jagged and uneven. Mrs. Price set down platters with a clatter that echoed her frustration. Miss Felicity, impeccably dressed as always, sipped her coffee with a smug curl to her lips, while Timothy hovered at the door, twisting his hands. Mr. Blackwood had not joined them, his absence noted by all but commented on by none. Hargrove was expected later, a parish council meeting providing the perfect cover for confrontation. "Family," Miss Marple began, her voice calm but commanding as she took her seat at the table's head. "I believe it's time we spoke plainly. The vicarage harbours a poison, one that's festered for years, and it's time to draw it out." The room froze. Lenora's teapot trembled in her hand, spilling a drop onto the linen. The Reverend cleared his throat, but no words came. Eliza's pencil snapped in her grip. Only Felicity leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Miss Marple reached into her bag, producing the locket first. She placed it in the centre of the table, its silver catching the light. This belonged to Clara Hargrove, engraved with her initials. Inside, a photograph of a young man, a soldier by the look of his uniform. Gasps rippled around the table. Lenora's face drained of colour. "Where did you—" she whispered. "The garden," Miss Marple replied evenly, buried as if to hide a memory. "But memories don't stay buried, do they, Lenora?" The Reverend's fork clattered to his plate. Clara was my wife's dearest friend. Her death was a tragedy, a fall from the cliffs during a storm, an accident. Miss Marple shook her head gently. Accidents leave no letters, no diaries confessing guilt. This, she said, sliding Lenora's diary forward, speaks of a man who came between you and Clara. C begs me to confess, you wrote. Who is C, Clara, or Charles Hargrove? Lenora's composure shattered. She buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her frame. It was me, she choked out. I took him from her. The soldier, his name was Edward Blackwood. He was Mr. Hargrove's cousin, home from the war. Clara loved him first, but he chose me. She never forgave me. That night on the cliffs, she confronted me. We argued, and she slipped. I didn't push her, I swear. But I couldn't tell. The guilt. It's eaten me alive. Eliza recoiled, her eyes wide with horror. Mother, you never said... Mrs. Price crossed herself, muttering a prayer, while Timothy stared in disbelief. Felicity, however, laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that sliced through the tension. Oh, how touching, she sneered, rising to her feet. Always the victim, Lenora. But you forget. I was there too. All eyes turned to Felicity. She snatched the locket from the table, opening it with trembling fingers. This man? Edward Blackwood. He was my father. Clara was with child when she died. Me, born in secret. Raised in London by distant relatives who told me tales of her friend Lenora, the one who stole everything. I came here to expose you, to make you pay for the life you denied me. The room erupted in chaos. The Reverend staggered to his feet, clutching his chest. Felicity, you're Clara's daughter. Eliza rushed to her mother's side, torn between fury and pity. Mrs. Price gasped. I knew it. The letters, the visits, you were always prying. But Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing the uproar. And the notes? The slashed curtains, the stolen chalice. Felicity's defiance cracked, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I typed the note accusing you of the affair with Hargrove. It was a lie to stir the pot. The curtains, a symbol of your precious velvet lies. The chalice, sold to fund my revenge. And the donation box? A distraction while I searched the attic for proof. Timothy stepped forward, his voice steady. But the shadows in the hall, the midnight meetings? Felicity whirled on him. Hargrove! He found out weeks ago, blackmailed me into silence with promises of inheritance. We met in the woods to plan, but he's as guilty as I am. He slashed the curtains himself that first night. The door burst open then, admitting Hargrove, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, with Blackwood, the gardener, trailing behind him, his scarred cheek pale. Enough! Hargrove bellowed. Felicity, you fool. Edward was my cousin. Yes, but he died in the war, before Clara even knew she was pregnant. This locket? A forgery. I made it to protect her memory. He turned to Lenora, his voice breaking. I loved Clara, not you. But after her death, I courted you to stay close, to watch over Eliza, Clara's true daughter, not Felicity's tale. Eliza screamed, collapsing into a chair. What? Lenora nodded through tears. It's true. Edward was your father, Eliza. Clara died knowing, but she made me promise to raise you as my own. Felicity, you're no kin, just a vengeful stranger who twisted the truth. Blackwood spoke at last, his voice gravelly. I'm Edward's brother, came back to find answers. The footprint. Mine. I was watching, waiting. He pulled a scarred hand from his pocket, revealing the missing chalice. Found it in Felicity's room last night. Felicity lunged for it, but Timothy restrained her. Hargrove sank to his knees. Forgive me. The affair rumour? My doing, to deflect from the past. Miss Marple watched it all, her expression serene. The glove by the gate, yours, Mr. Hargrove. The knife under the floorboard, Felicity's tool for threats. The ink in the study, Eliza's, innocently typing a letter, but used against her. As constables arrived, summoned by Timothy's earlier call, Felicity was led away, her curses fading into the hall. The family huddled together, broken but healing. Lenora embraced Eliza, whispering apologies. The Reverend prayed softly. Hargrove and Blackwood stood apart, united in grief. But as the dust settled, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed on a final shadow. Mrs. Price, slipping away with a small bundle under her apron. "One more secret," Miss Marple murmured, following her to the kitchen. "There," Mrs. Price confessed, tears flowing. "I wrote the first anonymous note, years ago, to protect Lenora from Clara's rage. The rest, I covered for them all." Miss Marple nodded, the final piece clicking into place. The unveiling was complete, but Justice's hand lingered. As evening fell, the vicarage breathed easier. Its shadows lifted. Yet in the quiet, Miss Marple knew one last revelation awaited, the true heart of forgiveness, in the morrow's light. Chapter 10. The Light of Forgiveness. The velvet vicarage stood serene under a dawn sky streaked with pink and gold, its heavy curtains glowing as if cleansed of their secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles resting in her lap, a steaming cup of tea at her side. The tumult of the previous day's revelations, Felicity's vengeful schemes, Hargrove's tangled guilt, Lenora's hidden truths, and Mrs. Price's long-buried confession had left the household raw, like a wound freshly stitched. Yet the air was lighter, as if the truth had swept away decades of dust and deceit. Miss Marple's collection of clues, the locket, the silk scrap, Clara's letter, Lenora's diary, the brass key, and the monogrammed glove, lay tucked in her bag, their purpose served. But one final task remained: to weave the frayed threads of the vicarage family into a tapestry of healing. She began the morning with a walk through the garden, where the dew sparkled on Mr. Blackwood's roses, and the back gate, once a portal for shadowy figures, stood firmly locked. The patch of earth where she'd found the locket was smooth now, a silent witness to Clara's tragic past. Miss Marple paused, her thoughts tracing the web of love and betrayal that had ensnared this place. Clara's love for Edward Blackwood, Lenora's unwitting theft of his heart, and the ripple effects that birthed Felicity's revenge and Hargrove's quiet grief. The vicarage had been a stage for pain, but today it could become a home again. At breakfast, the household gathered, their faces marked by exhaustion, but softened by hope. The Reverend, his collar straightened for the first time in days, sipped his tea with a steadier hand. Lenora, her elegance tempered by vulnerability, met Miss Marple's gaze with a grateful nod. Eliza, sketching quietly, glanced at her mother with cautious warmth. Mrs. Price bustled in with fresh scones, her usual scowl replaced by a tentative smile. Timothy lingered at the door, his nervous fidgeting gone, while Blackwood joined them, his scarred face less guarded. Only Felicity was absent, her fate now in the hands of the law, and Hargrove had sent word he'd arrive later, his presence still a weight in the room. Miss Marple set her cup down, her voice gentle but firm. "This house has carried a heavy burden, but truth has a way of lightening the load. Let's speak of forgiveness now, for it's the only path forward." The family leaned in, their eyes fixed on her. She began with Lenora, whose confession had cracked the case open. "Lenora, you've carried guilt for Clara's death, believing your argument on the cliffs caused her fall. But accidents are not crimes. You raised Eliza as your own, honoring Clara's wish. That's love, not betrayal." Lenora's eyes filled with tears. "I should have told Eliza the truth about Edward. I was afraid she'd hate me." Eliza reached for her mother's hand, her voice soft. "I was angry, but I understand now. You loved me enough to keep me close." Miss Marple smiled, her heart warming at the sight. "That's a start, dear. Build on it with honesty." Turning to the Reverend, she continued, "Clement, you've hidden your grief for Clara, fearing it would fracture your family. But your love for Lenora and Eliza is your strength. Share Clara's memory with them. It's a gift, not a wound." The Reverend nodded, his voice thick. "I've kept her letters locked away too long. Tonight, we'll read them together, as a family." He glanced at Eliza, who offered a small smile, a bridge forming between them. Mrs. Price, polishing a tray in the corner, froze as Miss Marple addressed her. "You wrote that first note, years ago, to protect Lenora from Clara's rage. It was misguided, but your loyalty to this family is unquestioned. Help them heal now. Your hands have shaped this home for decades." Mrs. Price's shoulders sagged, relief breaking through her stern facade. "I'll try, Miss Marple. I owe them that." She set the tray down gently, a silent promise. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Blackwood, who sat quietly, his hands folded. "Mr. Blackwood, you came seeking answers about your brother Edward. You found the chalice, exposing Felicity's theft. Your silence was your shield, but your actions spoke of justice. Stay, if you will, and be part of this place." He met her eyes, his scar softening in the light. "I'd like that, ma'am. For Edward's sake." Hargrove arrived then, his face haggard but resolute. Before he could speak, Miss Marple raised a hand. "Mr. Hargrove, you fueled rumours and forged the locket to protect Clara's memory, but your silence hurt those you love. Make amends. Start with Eliza, who carries your sister's spirit." Hargrove knelt beside Eliza, his voice breaking. "I courted your mother to watch over you, not to betray Clara. You're her legacy, and I'll honour that." Eliza nodded, tears streaming, and the room felt a little warmer. Timothy, standing by the door, cleared his throat. "Miss Marple, what about the village? They're still whispering about curses." She chuckled softly. "Let them whisper, dear boy. You've been their eyes and ears, and your honesty kept this case from unraveling. Tell the truth gently, and the gossip will fade." He grinned, a weight lifting from his shoulders. As the morning wore on, Miss Marple slipped into the study, where the typewriter sat silent, its role in Felicity's schemes exposed. She ran a finger along its keys, recalling the typed word guilt she'd found. Felicity had orchestrated the vandalism, the theft, the notes, all to punish Lenora for a past she'd misread. But the true guilt lay in silence. Clara's, Lenora's, Hargrove's, even Mrs. Price's. Each had hidden a piece of the truth, letting it fester until Felicity's arrival ignited it. In the garden, Miss Marple found Lenora and Eliza talking quietly, their hands clasped. The Reverend joined them, carrying Clara's letters, ready to share her story. Mrs. Price baked in the kitchen, her humming a soft melody of renewal. Blackwood pruned the roses, his movements steady, while Hargrove lingered at the gate, promising to fund the church's repairs as penance. The vicarage was healing, its velvet curtains no longer hiding shadows, but framing a new beginning. As evening approached, Miss Marple packed her bag, her clues tucked away like finished stitches. She left a note for the Reverend, suggesting a new lock for the study door, and slipped out to catch her train. The vicarage stood tall against the sunset, its windows aglow with promise. The mystery was solved, the betrayals laid bare, and forgiveness had taken root. As the train chugged away from St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple gazed at the fading hills, her heart light. The velvet vicarage would endure, its story a testament to truth's quiet power. If you've been gripped by this tale of secrets and redemption, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Comment below with your thoughts, and join us for more mysteries that unravel the heart of human nature.